I had spent years shouldering the quiet weight of a family that never noticed how close we lived to the edge. One dinner, desperate and raw, I voiced what had been gnawing at me. We're drowning in bills. Her reply wasn't concern or comfort, it was a dagger. Then work harder like he does. In that moment, I realized I'd been replaced, not by love, but by admiration for someone I trusted. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated erosion of everything I thought we'd built together. Now, I don't yell, I don't break down, I calculate. And I've decided, if they want to admire him so much, they'll get to know the cost of that admiration. I'll show them what real work looks like, the kind that exposes secrets, ends illusions, and delivers justice with precision. It started with spaghetti overcooked, stuck together, barely salted. Our daughter pushed it around her plate. My wife scrolled through her phone, and he laughed at something no one else heard. I sat there, my back aching from another double shift, wondering how a meal could feel this cold when it was still steaming. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I didn't even plan to speak. But there's a threshold, a point where the silence turns into a scream you can't hold in. I watched the electricity bill sit unopened on the counter next to a flyer for some vacation resort. I looked at the shoes my daughter wore, 2 sizes too small, and the new watch on his wrist, and I said it. We're drowning in bills. The words dropped like cutlery hitting tile. For a second, nobody moved. He took a sip of wine. Didn't look at me. She did. She didn't ask which bills. She didn't ask what we could do. She didn't reach for my hand like she used to when we faced things together. Instead, she laughed on a loud laugh, but one of those clipped, dismissive sounds that make you feel smaller than silence ever could. Then work harder, she said, staring directly at me, like he does. He looked up then, finally. Not surprised, not awkward, just smug, like a man who's already won something I didn't even know I was competing for. I didn't speak again that night. I lay in bed next to her, listening to her breathe, like nothing had shifted. But something had, something final. It wasn't just what she said. It was the fact that she didn't even flinch when she said it, that she believed it, that somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing me as the man keeping the house running, and started seeing me as the dead weight slowing it down. I replayed everything. The longer hours he'd been spending at our place, always offering to help with the garden, the pipes, the taxes, the way she lit up when he entered a room, the way she started dressing again, fixing her hair, laughing louder when he cracked one of his tired jokes. I had trusted him once. He'd been a friend, someone I'd met at work, an accountant, with a charming grin and just enough wit to be disarming. He knew our finances, our weaknesses, our pressure points. And now, clearly, he also knew our dinner table. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. Those are instincts for men who still believe the wound is fresh. But mine wasn't fresh. It had been festering in silence. And that night, when she cut into me with that one sentence, she didn't open the wound, she marked its gravestone. So I lay there, eyes wide, and began to think, to calculate, to prepare. If they thought I was weak because I wasn't loud, they were wrong. If they thought I was defeated because I was tired, they didn't understand the difference between exhaustion and resolve. I'd been surviving on fumes. Now I was breathing something else entirely. Clarity. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about reclaiming the narrative. About gathering facts. About turning this slow erosion into an excavation. Because something was buried beneath all this money, secrets, maybe more, and I'd dig it out piece by piece. Starting with the man who wore expensive watches and told jokes at my dinner table. He was her example, her gold standard. I'd show her the full cost of admiring him. I started with the receipts. Not metaphorical ones, the literal ones. Faded thermal strips tucked into drawers, email confirmations buried under junk mail, credit card statements she never thought I looked at. When you live with someone long enough, you learn their habits. She never deleted anything, just filed things away in folders with vague names. Home, other, travel. The first discovery wasn't explosive. It was a dinner. A $124 tab at a restaurant I hadn't been to in over a year, dated 2 weeks ago. On a Thursday, the night she said she was at her sister's place, the signature on the receipt was hers. The other person listed him. 2 entrees, 1 dessert, 1 shared. I kept going. A hotel charge popped up on a credit card we rarely used. One we'd agreed to freeze last year. Apparently she had thought it behind my back. The transaction was small enough not to raise red flags. Just a night at a mid-range hotel 2 towns over. But the timing matched another story she'd told. A last-minute work seminar. I remembered her packing a laptop she never opened. I remembered her coming home distant, tired, but glowing. Still, I didn't confront. That would have been too easy. Too soon. Instead, I began documenting everything. I created a digital trail of my own. Spreadsheets, scanned receipts, backups of every email I forwarded to myself. Every time he visited our house, I noted the duration. I even installed a small security camera in the garage, not out of paranoia, but confirmation, and it paid off. One night, while I was supposed to be on a night shift, he arrived. He didn't go through the front door. He used the side key. The the one we kept hidden under the planter. I watched him walk in like he lived there. He knew I wasn't home. She knew I wasn't home, and still, there he was. I didn't stop there. I requested records from our joint accounts, tracked ATM withdrawals, scanned her phone usage under the guise of updating our shared mobile plan. I played the part of the bumbling, tired husband just enough to keep her guard down. Then came the breakthrough.1 folder, marked archived projects. Buried inside were PDFs from his company. Not mine, his. Statements, memos, and most notably, a joint application for a small business loan. The names on the form, his, hers, mine absent. The address listed was a property I didn't recognize until I Googled it and found it listed as a rental under her maiden name. They weren't just sleeping together, they were planning a future together. A business, a space, a life, where I was a silent financier. The money, it came from refinanced assets under my name quietly arranged, while I was too exhausted to notice. Signatures forged, digital forms submitted late at night. This wasn't just betrayal of the heart, it was financial sabotage, legal fraud, and it gave me leverage. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Control. She thought I was just tired, that I'd give up, that I'd let them build a life out of the one they stole from me. But I was building too. A case, a sequence, a narrative she wouldn't see coming until the moment it was already done. He thought I was invisible, that I'd stay in the shadows while he smiled across my table. He forgot one thing. Shadows are where things grow. Quietly, patiently. Until it's time to rise, people think betrayal happens in grand gestures, in passionate hotel encounters, or whispered lies over candlelit dinners. But real betrayal leaves fingerprints in mundane places. In the half-deleted browser history, the login remembered by a phone she forgot I still had access to. In the small, careless things people do when they believe no one is watching. She forgot to erase her messages. Not the ones on her main phone, but on the old one she kept in the kitchen drawer, the one she used for emergencies. The one I gave her when our daughter was born. It hadn't buzzed in years, but she had synced her accounts to it. Once, she forgot to log out. That phone became my window into her world. The messages weren't romantic, not at first. They were logistical, practical. Things like, did the wire go through? I'll call the property manager, TMRW. Tell him you need the car for errands. I'll meet you by 3. At first, I didn't know what I was looking at. It felt like code. But context is a patient teacher, and I had time. Time to decipher, to map timelines, to sync every vague phrase with something in our shared reality. The errands she ran, the late lunches, the sudden interest in volunteering. And then the tone shifted. You don't owe him anything anymore. This is our plan now. I can't wait until we don't have to lie. It wasn't just infidelity, it was intent. They were engineering a slow-motion exit, cushioning themselves with my resources while rehearsing their justification, that I had become distant, exhausted, a man too buried in bills, in overtime to notice he was being erased. But I noticed everything. There was a message that hit different. A draft, never sent, sitting in her notes app. It read, he doesn't ask questions anymore. It's like he already gave up. I don't think he'll fight it. We just have to wait until the lease clears. So that's what she thought of me. That I was already dead inside. That my silence meant surrender. They were waiting out a lease. One I signed. One that had a clause, a very specific clause about occupancy, shared liability, and an early exit penalty. A clause I remembered because I negotiated it myself when we renewed the lease 2 years ago. She never read the fine print, neither did he. That was their mistake. I didn't confront her. I began to prepare exits of my own. Quietly, I redirected mail. I opened a private P.O. box. I met with a financial advisor and explained my situation in broad, hypothetical strokes. He understood more than I expected, gave me 3 words I hadn't considered. Constructive abandonment claim. Legal language. The kind that doesn't just hurt feelings, it burns bridges, freezes assets, makes judges raise eyebrows. I started to meet with a lawyer under the pretense of reviewing our mortgage. That was partially true, but what I really wanted was a roadmap. I asked questions like, if a partner is funneling funds into a venture you didn't consent to, what are your rights? I kept it calm, factual, clinical. I never said her name, but I saw recognition in the lawyer's eyes. He'd seen this pattern before, people planning futures with borrowed foundations. I took inventory of everything I owned, not just physical assets, data, contracts, passwords. I changed them all. Quietly, slowly, I created a second life behind the curtain of our shared routine, and all the while, I kept being exactly who they expected. Tired, quiet, complacent. She thought I wasn't asking questions because I didn't care, but I had learned something essential. You don't disrupt a scheme by announcing you've discovered it. You let it grow. You feed it just enough to expose its roots. And then, when they're finally ready to harvest what they've stolen, you take the whole field with you. The first rule of dismantling a structure is to study its architecture, not just the obvious walls and doors, but the hidden supports, the beams behind the plaster, the wires behind the paint. If you pull the wrong piece too early, the whole thing falls without control. But if you understand the load-bearing points, you can take it down gently, precisely, with purpose. That's what this was. Now, demolition, not out of rage, out of design. I mapped everything, their timelines, their finances, his weaknesses, hers. I knew he had a mortgage on a condo he was renting under market value. I knew she had taken out a line of credit in both our names without informing me. I knew they'd co-signed a commercial lease using an LLC that hadn't been properly registered. They were building something on a foundation of lies, and in that carelessness, they'd left a dozen loose bricks. I started with the credit. Quietly, I flagged suspicious charges with the bank. My bank. I didn't accuse her. I asked for clarity, posing as a confused husband just trying to understand a few things. That was enough. A fraud inquiry was launched. Temporarily, the account was frozen just long enough to delay their plans. She noticed. She called me that afternoon at work, voice strained but composed. Did you do something with the card? I tried to pay for something, and it wouldn't go through. I played dumb. No idea. Maybe it's a bank issue. Can you check? I'll try. I never did. Instead, I met with my lawyer again, this time. With names, I laid it all out. The financial deceit, the romantic entanglement, the covert business venture, using my resources. I showed the receipts, the security footage, the messages. His expression didn't change. But he leaned forward, took out a pen, and began sketching a plan. It was cleaner than I expected. Brutal, but legal. Here's what we'll do, he said. We file for divorce, citing financial infidelity and constructive abandonment. We petition to freeze shared assets during proceedings. Simultaneously, we initiate a fraud claim against the unauthorized loan. And the lease? I asked. He smiled. That's the cherry on top. If she's subletting under false pretenses, we can have her evicted or force renegotiation. Depends how messy you want it. I didn't answer. Not yet. Next, I met with someone. I never thought I'd have to, a private investigator. I wasn't chasing images of betrayal. I didn't need intimacy captured on camera. I needed business connections. Paper trails, cross-references between their venture and our accounts. It took less than a week for him to come back with gold. Turns out, the property they'd leased for their new business had already defaulted on its first rent payment. He, my former friend, had tried to delay it, citing unexpected bank delays. What he didn't know was that she had no legal right to sign that lease in the first place. And what neither of them realized was that their startup name bore a close resemblance to one of my registered side businesses, a single letter off. That was enough for a cease and desist. While they were planning ribbon cuttings and website launches, I was preparing a legal wall they couldn't climb. My lawyer drafted the cease and desist letter that same week, citing intellectual property confusion and brand infringement. It would stall any progress they made without even mentioning our personal connection. To the world, it was a simple business conflict, but to them, it would be a warning shot. That night, she noticed something had shifted. Maybe it was the way I looked at her when she came home, or the way I didn't ask about her day. She tried to initiate small talk. You okay? Yeah, I said, just tired, thinking a lot about what future stuff. She smiled at that, misread it entirely. Thought maybe I was accepting it, settling into the slow fade she'd hoped for. But what I was thinking about wasn't fading. It was fire. Fire doesn't always begin with a match. Sometimes, it starts as pressure, quiet, invisible, building until the first spark finds it and everything goes up. That's what I had been constructing. Not revenge, but ignition. A controlled burn designed to leave nothing standing that wasn't built on truth. The first spark was financial. My lawyer submitted the divorce petition alongside the fraud claim. Timing was everything. She was served the documents at our home on a Tuesday, just after she came back from yoga. I made sure I was still at work. Let her sit in the silence with those thick envelopes in her hand, unopened but already screaming. I didn't speak to her that night. She did try. She hovered. Her movements were forced, uncertain, like a child caught stealing and waiting for the punishment to start. But I didn't give her rage. I gave her absence. The next day, she confronted me. What is this? She asked, holding the petition. Her voice cracked, not with guilt, but with disbelief, like the betrayal was mine for having the audacity to fight back. Exactly what it says, I replied. The accounts, the loans, the property. You thought I wouldn't notice. You're overreacting. It was just business he was helping. You signed my name on legal documents. That's not help, that's fraud. She froze, not because she hadn't done it, but because she never expected me to say it. To call it what it was. Then came the second spark, the cease and desist. It landed on his desk 2 days later, shutting down their pre-launch website, halting promotional materials, and stalling vendor contracts. Their emails bounced. Their logo was now considered a liability. My investigator made sure the notice came not from me directly, but from my company's legal branch. impersonal, unforgiving. He called her, she screamed. I watched from the hallway as she paced the kitchen, phone to her ear, whisper yelling into the void. He says he's suing us for brand infringement. How the hell did he? She stopped talking when she saw me, but I just walked past her, picked up my keys, and left the house. I didn't need to hear the rest. The third spark was silence. I stopped responding to her attempts to negotiate, to explain, to salvage. She tried kindness, then outrage, then tears. I gave her nothing. Every time she spoke, I measured my words like currency. Not out of pettiness, but because I knew everything she said now was either bait or defense, and neither deserved more of me. What I hadn't anticipated, though, was our daughter. She didn't know details, but kids always feel the shift, the coldness, the tension. She began asking questions with her eyes before she dared use her voice. Dad, why are you and Mom being weird? I didn't lie, but I didn't poison her either. Sometimes grown-ups stop seeing each other the way they used to, and when that happens, it's better to be honest than pretend. Are we still a family? Always, I said, but maybe not in the same house. That was the only part that hurt. Not losing the marriage I had grieved that long ago. Not losing the friend I had never truly known him, but explaining to a child that adults fail, and sometimes failing means leaving. That left a mark. The final spark was public. The lease, the forged signature. The landlord, armed with the legal notice I had filed, called her personally to terminate the contract. She cried, begged, offered to fix it. He declined. By then, the property had already been reclaimed and reassigned to another business. I never met the new tenants. I didn't need to. He showed up to our house once more, parked his car in my driveway like nothing had changed. When I opened the door, he didn't smile this time. This is going too far, he said. You're ruining lives. I studied his face, looking for any trace of the friend he used to pretend to be. I didn't ruin anything, I said. You just didn't think the man picking up the check would pick up the pieces too. He didn't speak again, just left. They had built something on stolen hours, stolen signatures, and borrowed hope. All I did was return the bill. The house was quieter now, not in the peaceful sense, but hollow, like the air had changed texture. She still lived there technically. Legally, it would take weeks before the court issued orders on separation of space. But we moved like ghosts around each other, sharing was without acknowledgement. She tried one last time to reset the tone. I didn't mean for it to get this far, she whispered one night, as if regret could somehow rewind time. But meaning is irrelevant once actions are documented. You don't sign someone's name on a financial contract and call it an accident. You don't siphon resources and then plead confusion. She had counted on my fatigue, my predictability, my silence. Now, those were the very things she feared. The court responded to the fraud claim quickly. My documentation, receipts, emails, security footage, bank records spoke louder than any accusation. She wasn't arrested. This wasn't criminal, not yet. But the judge froze our joint accounts, assigned a forensic accountant, and halted any sale or withdrawal of shared assets. She wasn't just caught, she was caged. Her lawyer reached out next. They always do when consequences arrive. He proposed a settlement, quiet, quick, partial equity in the business she and he had tried to build on my back, but I rejected it. Not out of spite, because there was nothing to split. The business was stillborn. The name was blocked. The lease voided. The bank now watched her activity with a level of scrutiny she'd never anticipated. The investigator I hired had gone further than I asked. He discovered that he, the man I once called friend, was under IRS audit for discrepancies in his own firm's reporting. Not because of me, just a coincidence. But timing, as always, is the silent ally of the observant. When the audit landed, it was the final fracture. His finances collapsed faster than hers. The last text she ever sent him, one I wasn't meant to see but did. Thanks to the synced backup, she forgot to delete it. You promised me we'd be okay. I lost everything for this. I didn't feel vindicated. Just finished. My lawyer handled most of the proceedings from then on. I didn't show up to every meeting. I didn't need to hear her justifications or his excuses. I focused on our daughter, our schedule, the logistics of a new life that now required no negotiation with deception. The divorce was finalized in 91 days. I retained the house, not out of sentiment, but to prevent her from claiming the emotional high ground of displacement. I wanted no stories about the man who threw her out, so I stayed, calm, unmoving. She left of her own accord, papers signed, keys returned, silence intact. The last thing she said to me, standing at the doorway with a box in her arms, was simple. I didn't think you'd ever fight back. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to fight for. She left, he disappeared. Last I heard, he'd sold his car, shuttered his firm, moved 3 counties over. Maybe he's rebuilding. Maybe he's still blaming the economy, or the system, or bad luck. Men like him rarely blame themselves. And me, I didn't celebrate. I adjusted. I repurposed the room they used to meet and turned it into a home office, then into a reading room for my daughter. I started cooking again. Not as a distraction, but as ritual. Small rituals are where life begins after devastation. Not in revenge, not in justice. In the choice to move through fire and still find form on the other side. What they took wasn't love. That had long since faded. What they took was belief. Trust in shared direction. Confidence in quiet labor. They turned loyalty into liability. But in trying to erase me, they handed me every tool I needed to rewrite everything. Justice rarely looks like victory. It doesn't march down the street or announce itself in applause. It arrives in paperwork. In still mornings, in the quiet of a house no longer inhabited by deception. That's how it ended, not with a bang, but with absence. There was no final confrontation, no apology worthy of note. She left behind some clothes, a half-used bottle of perfume, and one photo album she must have forgotten. I didn't throw it out, I put it in a box, labeled it, stored it, proof of what once was. Evidence of who we used to be before it all calcified into strategy. I kept working, not out of necessity, but momentum. I wasn't trying to rebuild what they broke. I was building something entirely new structured around autonomy, clarity, and the stubborn insistence that I would not be defined by betrayal. I watched our daughter adapt, slowly. She didn't ask much about him, or about her mother's new apartment, though I could tell she noticed the shift. Kids don't articulate the cracks, they trace them in silence. I didn't feed her bitterness. I fed her consistency. Showed up to everything. Listened more. Answered when she asked. Withheld when she didn't. The most surprising change came a few months later. I started sleeping again. Not just collapsing into bed from exhaustion, but real sleep, the kind that doesn't feel like escape, but restoration. I stopped checking the cameras, the spreadsheets, the alerts, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to anymore. Everything worth knowing had already been revealed. She reached out once, after everything, a letter, handwritten. I read it once and never again. It was neither confession nor apology. More of a justification, dressed in soft regret. She wrote, things like I didn't feel seen, and I got lost, and he listened in a way you stopped doing. But the truth was simpler. She thought I wouldn't fight, that I would keep paying, keep nodding, keep fading. She mistook discipline for weakness, that her mistake wasn't just moral. It was strategic, that in the end, she wasn't leaving a man, she was fleeing the consequences of the lies she thought would go unanswered. There's no ceremony for surviving this kind of thing. No medals for those who kept their rage internal, who let the system work instead of setting everything on fire. But I don't regret it, because what I kept was my integrity. What I reclaimed was my name. People sometimes ask if I'd ever trust again. If I believe love is still possible, I do. But love now, to me, is not a promise. It's a pattern, something proven in repetition, not words. Something measured in how people act when they think you're not paying attention. Because that's when the truth shows up. Always, in whispers. In small signatures. In silence, and now, silence is mine again. But not the kind born of exhaustion. Not the kind bred by fear. This one is earned. The kind of silence you get when the storm finally understands. It has no power here anymore. That's the final ledger. And for the first time in years, it's balanced.